Hey everyone, Jessica here. Really excited for today. Today we have Ruth Wang here, former Director of Product Management and Analytics at PayPal. And we're actually in person here in San Francisco. This is pretty new. Ruth, welcome to our YouTube channel.
Thank you for having me.
So by way of background, Ruth and I have actually known each other for quite some time. We went to business school together, and even after business school, we were working at eBay together, sitting across the aisle from each other. But what I think is really cool is, excuse me, since eBay, our paths have diverged quite a bit. So I thought it would be super fascinating to have Ruth on our channel because it's always useful to hear people's personal stories, how things have evolved, the decisions that they've made, the mistakes that they've made, and really help people who are earlier in their careers, earlier in their personal finance journeys. So let's jump into it. Cool. So Ruth, I thought maybe just to start out, could you tell us about yourself? I know you went to Cornell, graduated in 2007. What's happened since then?
So I graduated in 2007, and actually that was the peak of the last financial prosperity. And my investment banking class at Merrill Lynch was 200 people. So it was incredible to join the industry at the peak, and I actually witnessed the last financial crisis unravel itself. Went through the layoff, the bloodbaths on Wall Street, really gave me a different perspective. The risk tolerance and the preference for capital preservation. And after that, I joined a hedge fund, work as a long-short equity investment analyst for a couple of years before going to business school, and that's where we met. After that, I actually decided to take a very different direction of my career instead of going back to finance, which was my plan all the way through business school. I took a very last-minute decision to actually have a change of heart and flew myself out to San Francisco, slept on friend's couch, and found a job with eBay, and that's where we worked together right after business school. Since then, I worked with the company for 7+ years in very different roles, and I recently left PayPal and as part of just awakening from the pandemic and trying to explore what's next for me.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. Could you talk a little bit more about that change of heart? Like what caused that? Why switch from finance to tech? It seems quite different.
Yeah, it sounds a little bit cliche to talk about business school as a transformational experience, and I actually went into business school not thinking that I was going to take a different direction. The whole time I was very much active in investment club, looking at how to actually get myself prepared for a career to be a portfolio manager and start my own hedge fund. And then towards the very end, I attended a lecture by Clay Christensen, who was a very famous professor at HBS, Harvard Business School. And he was famous for innovation and disruption theory, but he had a book at that time called How We'll Measure Your Life, which was actually about applying the disruption theory and resource allocation theory to your personal life, looking at how to better optimize for the right outcomes in life, which is not just the financial outcome, but also happiness and well-being. So that lecture and book really changed how I think about the different outcomes I should optimize for. And I basically just had that gut feeling that I should do something different, and just decided very quickly within a couple of weeks that I want to do something different, not knowing actually what would that be.
That's fascinating that you use the term optimize, that you've been going after optimization like throughout your entire career, but at the same time that optimization and gut reactions are actually one and the same. You don't normally think about it that way, but that is super cool.
Yeah, I think if your background was investment banking, right? You were basically trained to build models and analyze different scenarios and looking at the probabilities and optimize for the outcome. But then later on, especially as I have more life experiences, I realize gut feeling is sometimes just that subconsciousness of analysis that's been going on without your conscious mind and rational mind involved. So it's a cliche sometimes to talk about gut feelings, but I think more and more I'm actually relying on my gut feelings to make decisions.
Really cool. So I think one of the really interesting things about your career is, so after, so I left eBay back in 2015, and you didn't stay with eBay. You actually moved on to PayPal, but all within the same family. And then within PayPal, you made a bunch of different role changes. Yeah, talk about the sort of the career decisions behind staying with one company and trying many different roles versus say moving around to different companies.
Yeah, I think everybody have a slightly different career path, and there's really no right or wrong answer. It's very individual. So my decision to stay and grow with PayPal was very individual as well, because I was on H-1B visa, and as a Chinese citizen, it took a really long time for me to get my green card, and I think that's part of the immigration system in the US that's not merit-based, that create a lot of these challenges for talent to stay. So for me, with that type of personal background, my decision is really grow with the company, leverage the opportunity to grow different skill sets that actually prepare me for a general management type of personal career trajectory later on. So I leverage opportunities to grow a bigger team and skilling and really learning about different domains and functions. So that is just a really great experience to have the opportunity to grow within the company.
Gotcha. And so that's actually your long-term goal then, to be a general manager. How do you define general manager? I feel like that's such a broad term, and it probably equates more to like the old school manufacturing type of jobs from a century ago. Like, how do you define general management today?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And my last role at PayPal was product management, and people mostly associate general manager with product management, and people usually say that a good product manager is a mini CEO of your product. And I think for me, the general management is more of a mentality than the actual specific tasks you do in the job. The mentality is this entrepreneurial pursuit and being incredibly resourceful to really leverage different resources to optimize that outcome that you're pursuing.
Maybe along the same lines. So, you tried a bunch of different roles within PayPal, but I think what is really impressive is also that you've, very much moved up within PayPal as well. So could you talk a little bit about like building a career within a company and sort of, one of the things actually that really has always impressed me about you is, how much you advocate for yourself. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about that too, or being outspoken, not compromising on who you are in your career, and really bringing your whole self to work. So yeah, maybe that's a very broad question, but yeah, would love to hear more about that.
It's actually really funny that you think I'm very good or very focused on advocating for myself, and this is actually an area I personally felt was my development area for the last few years. And part of that is because my background and upbringing was very Asian, and there was a cultural element in the Asian upbringing to be humble, to be very collective and not really talk about yourself. But then if you look at the American corporate culture, it's very extroverted. It's very much about building that personal brand and tell the story. So it took me a really long time to actually realize that from personal experiences that I have to really be my own advocate and really talk about my story. And I think, the mentality was I will just do the good work and let the results speak for themselves. But the reality is, if you don't really talk about and really advocate yourself about the results, the executive leadership probably wouldn't know that you're the person behind these great results. So I think that's definitely part of my learning curve, and really challenge myself outside of my comfort zone to really speak for self, and that's probably one of the things I've learned over the years.
Was there anything that really worked for you, or where you saw like, oh, hey, doing it this way, tips in terms of like, almost bucking like your previous training to do things a different way? Was there anything that really worked for you, or any tips that you would give to people who are thinking about, moving up in their career?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've learned, I think is very important, is try to speak up in meetings. I've seen this happen quite a lot to women, especially to women of color, that you have great ideas, but you're uncomfortable speaking in a room where there's a lot of super extroverted people that basically own the airtime. But on top of that is also being very assertive in a situation where some people is trying to challenge you, instead of getting flustered, really hold your ground and be calm, but also trying to build consensus without giving ground. I think that's the hard skill I've learned over the last few years.
It totally sounds like a very tricky balance that you're trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, being very honest here, right? Especially women in leadership positions, you're generally either considered to be very, very aggressive or incompetent. It's very hard to find that nice balance to be perceived as very competent but also very warm, and that's something I have many incredible female leaders I look up to over the years, and part of it is just practice. Little by little you build that confidence.
Yeah, I personally, for me, I think a lot of it was confidence. It's having some experiences under my belt, or some relationships where people really believe in me, and then having that confidence to actually withstand. Like what you're describing sounds really hard, especially if you're in a room where like people don't believe in you or don't have faith in you. And so having that support network, having that confidence in yourself, I feel like enables you to be the person who actually speaks up.
Yeah, I think part of it is recognize the confidence issue, right? There was a very famous article in The Atlantic a few years ago called The Confidence Gap. And to me, a lot of the women I try to mentor in the company, that's one of the first articles I sent them, because many people didn't realize they have a confidence gap issue. That, from my perspective, they're super competent and very, very intelligent, and they have a lot of great things to contribute, but for whatever reason, they're holding themselves back from speaking up. And a big part of it is helping them realize that there is a gap. There is a gender difference, and then that actually helped them to slowly become more comfortable. And a lot of times, it's not something that can change overnight, but you kind of basically slowly really kind of trigger yourself to slowly build that muscle, and over time you build muscle memory.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, so let's talk a bit about personal finances. A broad question first to sort of like calibrate the people who come on the channel. Are you an accredited investor?
Yeah, I am. I don't know if your audience knows the criteria to be considered as accredited investors, but generally in the US, there are two big criteria. One is have an annual income over $200,000 for 2 consecutive years, or you have a net worth over $1 million.
Okay, yeah. So can you talk a little bit about how your portfolio is allocated then, between different assets and things like that?
Yeah, sure. It's a great question, and I actually didn't start thinking about asset allocation until a few years ago. So I've been reading about different ways to think about your asset allocation across different asset classes, such as stock versus fixed income type of assets versus some of the more alternative asset classes. So at the moment, I'm basically looking at about 40% allocation in stock, 40% in real estate, which to me is more a fixed income type of return profile, and then also 10% in cash, and then 10% in a little bit more alternative. As I look at what's next for me or longer term, I think I probably want to figure out a way to shift a little bit more into some of the alternative asset class and a little bit more away from the traditional allocation into stock versus real estate.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, maybe you could talk more about that. So honing in first on the real estate piece, like that's a big chunk of real estate in your portfolio. Talk a little bit about that. How did that evolve? How did you get interested in real estate?
Yeah, sure. I think my interest in real estate is just supernatural, right? Growing up in China, and I've basically seen a big wealth generation in China through the 90s and 2000s is through real estate. And I think if you look at the families in San Francisco Bay Area, that's probably true as well. And there is just that cultural element to it about owning your primary residence that is deeply rooted not only in my Chinese background, but also in this American dream as well. And then if you look at it just generally, the asset class, it's relatively stable. It gives you the opportunity for a stable income stream over time if you have rental properties, and with the long-term aspect of being a pretty decent hedge against inflationary pressure, but also give you the opportunity to have leverage. So this is actually probably one of the first asset classes for people to start thinking about wealth accumulation. And I think I'm not alone in the sense, because recently there was an article that actually looked at Americans and their asset allocations by their wealth buckets. And if you're not the uber rich, meaning 5 million plus net worth, majority of people's net worth actually sits in real estate. And it's only when you actually go above the family bracket, then you start to see broader diversification into other asset class.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So maybe you could share with you a little bit about your process of actually buying real estate, because I think we hear from a lot of people actually that eventually buying real estate, buying a house, buying a rental property is sort of a long-term goal. So how did you go about achieving this? I'm assuming you didn't buy it like straight out of undergrad. How did you actually work towards that?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really great question. So for me, it's really just, looking over years. When I actually lived in New York City before business school, I've been thinking about real estate. I've been trying to learn more. And then when I moved out to Bay Area after business school, looking at the rent price at that time versus the mortgage, it was almost a no-brainer for me to just say, hey, I should own instead of paying rent. So a lot of times it's really looking at this asset class, getting more information, knowledge about it, so that when the time comes, when you have the capital base and also the right timing, you can pull the trigger easily.
Yeah, okay, so I would love to hear a little bit about the alternative assets that you mentioned earlier. So what alternative assets do you believe in? How did you come to 10%? And where do you expect this to grow? You mentioned that you hope that it's going to increase over time.
Yeah, so alternative asset classes are generally illiquid with a high risk reward type of profile. So the two type of investment I have is first some of the private equity investment. These are angel checks, small checks into people actually mostly believing. And the other type of investment I have is crypto. And I think this is something that it took me a really long time as a bystander to watch the market evolve. And a few months ago, having traveled with a friend who's been very deep into the crypto market, it really gave me the opportunity to learn a little bit more. And then I spent quite a bit of time diving into just the crypto blockchain technology itself, and really, for me, it's just an awakening to see the potential of this Web3 technology being completely permissionless, give you that free composability. They just bring a lot of efficiency into the financial services. If you look at a lot of our fintech apps today, right, it's the beautiful facade of user experiences, but under the hood, it is still connecting to a lot of the legacy systems and APIs that require significant amount of human coordination with the open and permissionless nature of blockchain networks. This is just bring massive efficiency to our system, and it's going to create a lot of new product experiences. So I definitely became a believer, and for me, it's a little bit, again, coming down to the asset allocation question is, this is going to be a very, very risky investment class. It's one of those high potential return, but also highly volatile markets. So I put in the amount of asset I think that I can afford to lose. I don't need the money for the day-to-day expenses, but also something that I'm willing to put a long-term bet because I have a strong belief in the future.
That's super cool. That is a lot about belief. Maybe one more question on personal finances is like, how has your career influenced your personal finance stack, right? Like, how are these two things related, or maybe they're not? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So I think because I entered job market in 2007 and really witnessed the peak to trough of the last financial crisis, it's like the people who grew up in the winter time always have a different sense of risk compared to people who grew up in the spring and summertime. So for me, there is definitely a lot of heavy emphasis in my thinking around capital preservation. So my investment styles even have investment in more risky asset classes. I do look at some of the more traditional investment instruments as opportunities to have a more stabilized portfolio with pretty solid capital preservation profile.
Gotcha.
Rather than just purely chasing returns.
Yeah, really interesting. Okay, so last, to close out, any tips for people who are earlier in their careers, early in their personal finance journeys?
I think one thing I wish I knew better in my 20s is tax optimization. And if you look at the really rich people in America, tax comes in a very, very big part of their wealth accumulation and preservation. And one really good example is Peter Thiel. He has a $5 billion Roth IRA account, and that is something a lot of people don't actually use this particular tax-deferred investment vehicle. Or I think there is a way, even your capital income, to use a backdoor IRA, Roth IRA conversion scheme to actually help you build wealth in such a way. So I would definitely recommend paying a little bit more attention to the tax code and how it's changing and how that might impact significantly the financial investment outcome over the time.
Got it. Well, thank you so much, Ruth. It was really great talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us here.
Thank you for having me.
Cool. And that's it. Thanks so much, everybody. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and also subscribe for more optimizations. Thanks.